So they asked for a pause. The president specifically asked me, and his gaggle of crackpot lawyers asked me to literally reject votes, essentially to overturn the election.
And I'm joined now by the former Trump Attorney General, Bill Barr. His first reaction since we have seen these new charges. And thank you so much for being here, Mr. Attorney General. I mean, you've now read through this indictment. Do you think it's a strong case?
Yeah, I think it's a legitimate case. I think, unlike the document case, it's going to have issues of proof. It's a more complicated case. And I think there are some downsides to it. I think there were reasons not to bring it. I've said before, I'm a little concerned about the slippery slope of criminalizing legitimate political activity. I'm worried about moving in that direction. And I'm also worried about bringing this case and the divisiveness that it will bring by highlighting the double standard. Because at the same time this case is being brought, the department appears to have dropped the ball on the Hunter Biden investigation. It's going to be very hard to persuade many Republicans that this isn't political.
We'll talk about the Hunter Biden investigation, but I mean, when you do look at the indictment, do you think it's something you would have brought?
I don't know if I would have approved the indictment, but in the sense I may have exercised discretion and not gone forward with the case. I'm also concerned about having this case going on during the election and diverting people's attention from the issues in the election. I'm also worried about what the impact is if there are acquittals during the campaign. But as a legal matter, I don't see a problem with the indictment. I think that it's not an abuse. The Department of Justice is not acting to weaponize the department by proceeding against the president for a conspiracy to subvert the electoral process.
Which is what Trump's attorneys are saying, and they're also saying that he was just exercising his First Amendment right here. Do you think that's a valid argument in your view?
No, I really don't think that's a valid argument because, as the indictment says, they're not attacking his First Amendment right. He can say whatever he wants. He can even lie. He can even tell people that the election was stolen when he knew better. But that does not protect you from entering into a conspiracy. All conspiracies involve speech, and all fraud involves speech. So, free speech doesn't give you the right to engage in a fraudulent conspiracy.
The other thing that they're arguing, including John Lauro, Trump's new attorney, to me last night, was that they were simply asking the former Vice President Mike Pence to pause on the counting of votes. Mike Pence pushed back on that today, said that's not what they were asking him to do.
Let's be clear on this point. It wasn't just that they asked for a pause. The president specifically asked me, and his gaggle of crackpot lawyers asked me to literally reject votes, which would have resulted in the issue being turned over to the House of Representatives, and literally chaos would have ensued.
How strong of a witness do you think he'll be against Trump if he's called?
Vice President? I think he'll be a very strong witness. He has the highest integrity. He's behaved with dignity and propriety all the way through this.
You agree that they weren't just asking him to pause the counting of the votes, they were asking him to overturn the election?
I wasn't around, but from what I read in the indictment, there was a discussion, and the president himself stressed that he would prefer him just to accept the votes in the panels that were pro-Trump, that it wasn't a question of just buying time.
Yeah. The other argument that we're hearing is about who Trump was listening to at this time. Trump's attorney, John Lauro, said this of John Eastman.
Mr. Trump had the advice of counsel, Mr. Eastman, who was one of the most respected constitutional scholars in the United States, giving him advice and guidance.
He's citing John Eastman as this constitutional scholar, but we know in the indictment, it says Trump was ignoring your advice, that of other senior Justice Department officials, Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, the director of national intelligence. Is it a credible defense to say he was just listening to John Eastman?
I don't think that dog is going to hunt, as you say. First, as to people who had some knowledge of whether or not there was fraud, everyone was telling him that the election was not stolen by fraud. And then as to the issue of what he could do legally at that point, he went through all the lawyers, he wouldn't listen to all the lawyers in the department in various departments or the White House that had those responsibilities, or his campaign. He would search for a lawyer who would give him the advice he wanted. But I'm not even sure you would characterize what Eastman said as advice. I mean, it'd be interesting to see, but I interpret some of what he was saying essentially was, well, it's unclear here, and you can make this argument. I'm not saying the courts would accept it and so forth. And you act on that at your own hazard. Also, I don't think this defensive advice of counsel is going to go forward, because I think the president would have to get on the stand and subject himself to cross-examination in order to raise that, and he'd also have to waive attorney-client privilege.
And what would happen if he got on the stand?
I think it would not come out very well for him.
Do you think it would hurt him?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Why do you think that?
Well, because I think he'd be subject to very skilled cross-examination, and I doubt he remembers all the different versions of events he's given over the last few years.
Do you think he knew that he lost the election?
Do I personally believe that? Yeah, at first I wasn't sure, but I have come to believe that he knew well that he had lost the election. And now, what I think is important is the government has assumed the burden of proving that. The government, in their indictment, takes the position that he had actual knowledge that he had lost the election and the election wasn't stolen through fraud. And they're going to have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt.
Which is a high bar, of course.
That's a high bar. Now, that leads me to believe that we're only seeing a tip of the iceberg on this.
You think Jack Smith has more?
Oh, yes. I would believe he has a lot more. And that's one of the things that impressed me about the indictment. It was very spare. And there were a lot of things he could have said in there. And I think there's a lot more to come. And I think they have a lot more evidence as to President Trump's state of mind.
You said you've come around to the idea that you do think he knew that he lost. Why have you come around to that?
Number one, comments from people like Bannon and Stone before the election, saying that he was going to claim it was stolen if he was falling behind on election night, and that was the plan of action. I find those statements very troubling. And then you see that he does that on election night, and then the evidence that has come out since that, the press reports and the indictment and his lack of curiosity as to what the actual facts were, just leads me. That's my personal opinion. That's my personal opinion. We'll see if the government can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. You
spoke to the January 6th Congressional Committee. Have you talked to Jack Smith's investigators?
I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to get into